Greatness under difficulties. The verse that I read, it's a great thing to say. And which one of us would not wish that they could say it? I know both how to be abased and I know how to abound. In comparison with what we once enjoyed and hoped for, we may seem not to be exalted, but to be abased. But if we are so, the really crucial question still remains to be determined. It is not the fact of being abased, but how to be abased that matters. Now let us begin by examining those aspects of our life which might make us say in this or any other time that we are abased. One obvious fact may be that many people may have lost their fortunes. There is a pathos in the poor. There is another and very real pathos in those persons who, having been rich, find themselves reduced to a scale of living which is relatively poor also. Material losses may alter the whole surroundings and associations of life. But there is another way in which there may come to people the feeling of having been brought down. We look back and see ambitions which have been defeated, or at least so halted that we are not sure that they will ever go forward again. Always there are those in whose hearts disappointment is echoing like the strokes of an iron bell. Such men and women come to the end of their reckoning, scarred and wounded. They are like gladiators who have been beaten to their knees by the sword of circumstances which proved too strong for the utmost that they could do. Or again, there is a more general way in which it is possible to feel abased. The influence which accomplishes this for innumerable people is simply the sense that life is passing. They are growing more and more acutely conscious of the shortness of the time and of the quality of even their most ambitious efforts slipping by. Beside the immense and impersonal passage of time, the significance of the one little individual life seems trivial. It dismays us to reflect how rapidly we have seen each year come and go. When we look at the gray hair, it tells us. That was deliberate, I'm
Yes,
sorry.
I know that.
I couldn't resist that one. I don't usually do that. Let us think now of what this man who lived long ago, but whose spirit is greater than any time or place, but he did experience, and how it was that it prevailed. First, and most obviously, he met the fact of material deprivation. From such fragmentary indications as we can gather, it would seem that Paul was born into a life of relative abundance. When he became a disciple of Christ, the old ties, of course, were broken. And henceforth, the well-to-do and privileged young scholar became the hated and ostracized representative of a sect which his former associates despised. We hear no more of any ties either with home or former friends. He goes about the world on his far-flung adventure of faith, trusting for the necessities of existence to such work as he himself could do, and to the free will offerings of the little Christian communities which he formed. He was following one who had the print of nails in his feet and hands. It did not seem strange to Paul that the stigmata of many iron sharpnesses should be in his flesh also. If he were poor, what did that matter? Still, he had within him the unsearchable riches of Jesus Christ. Furthermore, he had known the abasement of defeated ambitions. Often we think of Paul through our theological glasses. We see him as a finished figure, sometimes almost legendary and non-human. And we do not perceive the poignant human struggles through which he arrived at his final greatness. It was no small thing which he had abandoned to be a Christian. He had all the pride of his race and his class. There had been wide open before him the career of a great scholar and teacher, the career most honored and reverenced by those among his own people who had most influenced his thinking. But he had laid all this aside in order to choose something which was more authoritative for his soul. Then, as the vision brightened and he went forward in the glory of his new surrender, there were doubtless moments when he saw the possibility of a great triumph for the gospel that he was preaching. But what happened? The way of preaching and conversion was hard and slow. Here and there, souls responded, but there was bitter and malignant opposition among great masses of people in general. And ignorance and human pettiness and much backsliding, even among those who listened to the word. He had been mistaken in his first conception of an early second advent. The triumph of Christ would not come that way. Through long patience, by infinite faithfulness, and in a vista of time too far for his foreseeing, the kingdom must be brought about. But the soul of Paul was not abased. There in the deepest valley he looked upward, and the sunlight of an eternal confidence was in his eyes. If his ambitions had been defeated, it was only that God's infinite aims for him might be set free. And in the third place, Paul must have felt that general depression which accompanies the mood of every dying year. His time was short, and he knew it. How little of all that he had wanted to do had yet been done. How inadequate life seemed, and how short its horizon as compared with its range of hopes. Was this all it meant for Christ, to have died in the midst of a world that seemed as pagan as it had ever been? In thoughts like these, there was the possibility that his soul might have been brought altogether to humiliation. But here also he knew how to be abased. He had already learned how to conquer deprivation and disappointment. He could arm himself now at the last against despair. He trusted in him with whom a day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is as a day. We have considered the facts by which, in our time and in all times, may be abased. We have considered one great figure who met his abasement in such fashion that the greatness of his soul was the more revealed. And we pass on finally to consider the meaning of his secret as it applies to us. Take first the fact of the loss of material things. The only tragedy in loss of fortune, and even in great deprivation, is among those who show that they have not now, and perhaps have never, had any high belief in their own selves. Now that suddenly they have become poor, they are sensitive to the point of mental agony. They want to hide the fact of it, and if they cannot hide that, they shrink away and hide themselves from their former associates. But what is there in poverty, either relative or absolute, to bring defeat upon any man or woman, so long as the soul within is brave and true? Why should the mere loss of money dismay a man, or make any man think that his life need for that fact have any less significance? God give us all, to begin with, a brave truthfulness. If any man has lost money, yes. If materially he has lost everything, let him not try to conceal it and torture himself either with pretense or with evasion. Let him be ready that everybody with whom he has had associations should know the facts, simply and naturally, and without either apology or parade. And let him be sure that in the moment, when he realizes that there is no longer any possibility of anyone valuing him merely for what he has, then for the first time there may arise, both among his friends and within himself, a clear and virile new conception of what he is. It is possible to learn to be abased, and out of abasement to rise with a grander and more evident integrity of soul. As the chiseled statue rises to its serene proportions, the more that the concealing marble is cut away. But what shall we do when our abasement comes through some defeated ambition and frustrated aim? Well, we may rightly approach our answer here by considering what we must do. We must not begin by blaming circumstances. It is possible that circumstances may be to blame, but we can discover that later. The first thing we want is an honest consideration of what measure of blame there may be in us. Surely, there are many of us who can recognize the bearing of that upon our own realities. We look back and we see the things in which we have more or less completely failed. Anybody here ever completely fail at anything? I could go all 10 arms up, but I don't have one. But what if it be true that after a man has examined himself and corrected himself, still beyond the utmost which he can accomplish, the fact remains that his high desires are blocked and his plans defeated? Then let him put the issue up to God and go on. It may be that sometime tomorrow, the gates in the iron wall, which seems to hedge him around, suddenly opens. And all his joyous desires will go forward into the spacious freedom that he has longed for. Past their own blocked roadways, God has opened ascending paths to hilltops of accomplishments, which else they never would have scaled. Finally, when we come again to the sort of abasement which is most sure at last to fall upon us, and ask ourselves how we shall deal also with that, when life seems short and the years go fast, and our personal accomplishment seems so limited, how shall we still believe in the glory of life? The way of the answer must lie through a transfer of our consideration from ourselves to that which is greater than ourselves. Paul was not concerned about his own record or about what his life amounted to, because his thought was merged in a loyalty which embraced in its great certainty all these lesser questionings. He wrote for other men what he had proven to be true for himself. Whether we live together or die, we are the Lord's. He did not measure time by the span of his own existence. He was a part of something infinitely more grand, which gave stability and meaning to everything he might be or do, and which extended all the perspective of his hope. No matter how his present fortunes might seem to be abased, the real Paul could never be abased. Because in his thought, in his love, and in his dedication, he was made one with the will of God. And that's what that passage means. Knowing how to abound and be without.